Bird. I'm with the Iowa City Downtown District, and I'm hosting this week's community webinar, State of the Community webinar. And I've been very, fortunate to work with my esteemed colleagues and partners in our other organizations, Think Iowa City, the Iowa City Area Development Group, and the Iowa City Business Area Partnership to support, just one continuous communication through this COVID-19 crisis. So thank you for joining us. We have a really great panel this week that I look forward to introducing you all to. You can see them all here today in gallery view. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again one more time to make sure that we walk through all of our titles and give you some Q&A here, allowing you to see essentially how you ask for those questions. So hang in here with me. Go to the next one. So on our agenda today, we'll be talking with Andre Perry, the Executive Director for the Englert Theater and Mission Creek Festival. Nick Burgess is with us. He's the Communication Director of the City of North Liberty and also supports the Blues and Barbecue Festival. Jeff Capps is the Executive Director at the Iowa City Children's Museum. Andrew Sherburne is the Interim Executive Director and co-founder of Film Scene and is new to the new festival, Refocus Film Festival, coming this fall. Evan Hilsebeck is the Managing Director at Corville Center for the Performing Arts. And Chuck Swanson, the Executive Director of Hancher Auditorium and has been spearheading the Big Splash. So we're pleased to have you all with us today. Thanks for joining us. One thing that I want to make sure that everyone is aware of is how to ask questions. We're going to go through some questions initially and have a conversation, more of a dialogue, but we want to make sure that this is open and available for you to ask questions as you see the need. So make sure to click and open the Q&A box on your webinar screen. Go ahead and submit your question and then wait for either a reply or notification that it will be answered live. And we'll do our best to get all the questions during the webinar. And if not during, we'll be happy to follow up with you afterwards. So thank you all very much for joining us. I know that we've got a lot of really great leadership here in front of us, and there are others in the arts and culture world that are currently trying to make some really hard decisions in a time of uncertainty. So what I'd like to do, just starting off, is just to kind of go around and talk a little bit about the current situations that you're experiencing and some of the actions you're taking short term to deal with today's pandemic. Chuck, why don't we start with you? You gotta unmute yourself, Chuck. There you go.
Okay, well, first of all, Nancy, thanks again for hosting this. I think this is a very wise thing to do. So it's very challenging times, of course, for everybody. In some ways, it reminds me of 12 years ago with the flood, but in other ways, things are so different, so very, very different. So, but to begin with, obviously, we had to cancel, it was about 20% of our season. And so currently, we're dealing with ticket refunds. We have so many great donors and ticket buyers who ended up taking their ticket donation or ticket and giving it back as a donation, which is terrific. We have been dealing with artists and with agents. Cancellations are never any fun at all. But more than anything, we miss the gathering. You know, we miss being together with all these friends. And looking back at the performances that we had scheduled, we're trying to find ways to really other ways virtually. And it's really against the grain of what I believe in, because I love the performing arts, but we have no other way now to really keep in contact with our donors and our ticket buyers. And so we're trying to find unusual, creative ways to connect. I think people really now more than ever, they want to find ways to stay connected. So we have something going on about every other week. It's called the Hancher Conversations, Community Conversations. And these are interviews that we did way before the pandemic. And these are interviews from donors really talking about their relationship with Hancher. And so it's, as I mentioned, every other week, just small little clips. We're also working with an artist, Third Coast Percussion, and we're going to try to find some creative ways to engage, and there again, to be active and just to connect with our donors. We're also struggling with how to roll out our 2020-2021 season. We have different scenarios, because all of this is, of course, contingent on news from the university, news from our country, news from the world. It's going to be delayed for sure, but as to when, we don't know, and maybe even how we're going to roll it out, that might be a little bit different. And then also as a staff, we're trying to think about once we do reopen, it's not going to be business as usual. We're going to have to really find other ways of front of house procedures, backstage procedures, because more than anything, we want to make sure that we maintain a healthy environment, a safe environment, and both for our audience and for our artists. And so in some ways, I talked to an agent from New York yesterday, and he said, Chuck, with us too, it's just day to day. News changes so much. So it's tough working remotely with your staff, but I would say that Zoom house party teams have all become my friends. And I'm not really technology crazy because I love the face-to-face, the interaction, but they've been very helpful, because that's the way to connect best with a larger group of people. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
Well, it's certainly, we're fortunate that we have these tools today
You bet.
to use and access. I mean, it would be a very different environment if we didn't. And I think they've been around for a while. People just haven't always engaged them. So here we are. Andre, do you want to give a little update with the Englert and how things are going there?
Sure. So, Hansher and Englert are in somewhat similar worlds. So going through a lot of the same emotions that Hansher's going through in terms of those rescheduling activities, figuring out how your venue is going to just literally operate in terms of welcoming artists and staff and audience back into the space in a safe way. Right now, we're closed indefinitely. We closed around March 12th, March 13th. And we're working on the very soft assumption that we might be able to present some things late summer through the fall, but we know that that's very tenuous, and it's just really a day-to-day in terms of watching how things develop or don't develop. So that's part one. And then part two is, obviously there's a real financial impact by not having, one of our most important seasons, which is the spring season, all of our March, April, May presentations, Mission Creek Festival, our rentals and collaborations with the community. All those things roll offline, which is just part of where we're at. And so when we think about, survival and sustaining through the year, we're really looking at a multifaceted approach. So, we're obviously exploring all the loan programs that are out there, especially on the federal level. We're looking at all the grant opportunities that are out there. And then we're also working on operational restructuring. Some of that is just looking at the places where we can just straight up cut expenses and not spend things that we were going to spend on. And then some of that is also personnel and trying to figure out how do we need to cut back on personnel, but also strike the balance so you can kind of keep people engaged, keep them at least somewhat financially whole so that we can all just try to survive and bridge through this time. And so we're working through all of those discussions with our staff and with our executive committee of our board and just trying to figure out the right balance. So I think there's kind of like two outlooks, if there is some activity in the fall that would provide us both an ability to reconnect with the community, get some of that earned revenue through the door, a little bit more of a bridge to make it through to 2021. If we're looking at a situation where, the university isn't really active in the fall and we're just not at that point where we can really gather in some of these larger events, then we'll probably have to go into probably a little more drastic or just like a tougher situation in terms of, getting to the next year. And so I would say on the staff level, of course, no one's happy about it, but it's, I think everyone realizes that there's a collective burden that we're carrying together. And so we're just going to figure out how to do it together as well. And then, probably the most important thing right next to just sustaining and existing as an organization is we're just rethinking how we apply our mission to the new situation that we're living in. How do we still create joy, inspiration for our community, even if we don't have our stages in the typical way that we do? I think our first example of that is, Mission Creek Festival didn't happen in April, obviously. And so we created a Mission Creek Underground video series where we featured 4 musical artists as well as 2 writers who are local. And we were able to create not the same experience, but able to share some art and hopefully bring some, enjoyment to people who are, socially distanced all over the Johnson and Linn County area.
It sounds like staying engaged with your audience is a connecting thread here. Evan, how are things going in Coralville with the Performing Arts Center?
Sure. We have a slightly different tack because most of our day-to-day is not bringing in outside artists, but working with local organizations. Local, rental is the primary focus of what we do here. So a lot of our, like everyone, our spring has vanished, but we continue to try and work with, our local schools, local businesses, community groups, choirs, community theaters, all those folks that are usually part of our life here, and try and be conduits for them to connect them with other resources, make sure they know about the loan programs and some of the stuff that Andre's talking about, because we're often working with very small groups, and then just being flexible. How can we help them connect with audiences? How can we get them reschedule things for the fall? I think we're trying to be optimistic about the hope that some kinds of programming might be able to happen in a safe and sustainable way in the coming months, but everything is by ear right now. The fun of the quiet time is that that's a thing that never happens, I think, for any of us in our organizations. And so suddenly there's the sort of blessing is the opportunity to sit back and think, at least for a couple more minutes every day than we often get, about okay, what are our big picture goals here, and how can we help move our theaters forward in this time. We're doing a lot of literally physical maintenance and cleaning and repainting of the stage, and all of those things there's never time to do in a busy spring season when the paint wouldn't have time to dry. So we're making the most of what we can do in that way as well.
And Andrew, at Film Scene, theater and film are different. I mean, the experience is different when you walk into Film Scene in your different locations. How are things going for you guys, and what have you done to adapt to today's environment?
Yeah, well, in many ways, it's a similar experience to what was just described by everyone else. We're trying to take care of our employees. We're trying to stay connected with our patrons. We're doing some maintenance. Our theaters have probably never been cleaner. I guess in terms of how we're staying connected with our community, we're doing some virtual screenings. The thing about movies is you can watch a movie at home on your couch. But that's no substitute for going to the theater and seeing it with your friends, your neighbors, complete strangers. I mean, there's a much different experience being in a dark cinema than being at home. So that's hard for us, but we've always said that we're more than a movie theater. We're really a community hub and a place for people to make meaningful connections with each other and engage with the world. So we're trying to figure out how that translates to gathering virtually. So we've been doing some screenings where we have dialogues either during the screening or after the screening, just to talk about the films, talk about the issues presented in the films. Sometimes that's just fun. Tomorrow night we're watching Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark together. I mean, it's just going to be a good time, and that's fine. We need some of that right now. But we've done some some documentary screenings that have a little bit of a deeper conversation to go with them. I think for us, one thing that's a little bit different about our model is that, the movie business is really a week-to-week thing where every Monday we're deciding what we're opening or what we're holding over on that Friday. So our kind of forecasting is a little bit more immediate. We're kind of looking maybe a month or 2 months down the road and saying, will we be ready to show movies again then? The industry has pushed back a lot of those big opening dates for big movies, which indicates that we probably won't be showing movies before June, but we're hopeful that maybe by June we'll have figured out, what would be the right way to present films again here, and hopefully we have. That's is that I think, like everyone else, when we get to the fall, there's always that responsibility so we're kind of looking at all those different phases and making sure that we're planning to be able to present movies in a safe way when we do reopen, but hopefully in a way that still allows us to do what we do best, and that's give people an opportunity to connect with each other through the movies.
Well, just in watching and seeing online how all of you have basically amended your current operations in really quick time, it's been impressive to see how you've maneuvered this situation. It's not easy for anyone. So at the Children's Museum, Jeff, it's a very different venue, and you've got a very unique audience. How are things happening? What are things going on there?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, for having me on the webinar. A lot of similar themes for us that I've heard already from the other panelists. Obviously, working with children and
Jeff, I think you're freezing up a little bit. This is always the challenge with the webinar. Is like, the service has got to be good. Can you hear me, Jeff?
I can.
Okay.
You hear me?
Start over.
Sorry.
That's okay.
All right. So a lot of similar themes to what folks have been saying already. I think obviously for us working with children and other vulnerable populations and families, we've tried to take great care. We did close on March 16th. Had some good conversations with Andrew right in advance of that, getting the courage to make that move. So thank you. Thank you to colleagues who have been supportive. I think for us, one thing that we've tried to do is really up our game on online and do a lot more on a day-to-day basis and trying to engage kids, especially during the school year, and families, sing-alongs and different things like that, in terms of really trying to deliver some services to our core audience, and hopefully some new folks as well. So that's been an important part of what we've been doing. I think what's been on my mind lately, and I've heard this from other folks so far today, is you feel like you kind of experience this in waves, and it's like, okay, we got past that first really hard decision, and then you realize that there are like dozens of other hard decisions to follow. And I think we're all experiencing that in different ways in our sector. And I think about some of the things that I'm most proud of that we do in terms of being a place for people to convene and for kids to play in a safe space and learn and all those things. And some of the things that I'm most proud of are our free admission days and our Friday nights, our last Friday of the month, our fourth Fridays, that it's difficult to envision what those things look like. So that's my thing this week, is like, okay, we jumped over all these hurdles. Oh gosh, okay, so if we are able to open at some yet to be determined date, what do all of those things that are so central to the experience of the Iowa Children's Museum look like on the other side of this? So I think, we're all rethinking how we do things, and we're no exception to that. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now. We've furloughed a number of our staff. We have full intent to bring all of them back, but it's difficult. You got people that are passionate about the work that they do, especially in the nonprofit sector and the arts and culture space and education, and those are hard decisions to make. But I think when you look at the long-term sustainability, they're the right decisions to make too. And certainly doing everything we can to take care of our people, and that's been a primary focus.
Yeah, and it's heartening to hear how it seems like this community is on the same page about when it comes to public health and making sure that your approach, taking care of your employees, they're your family, and taking care of the people who walk in your door is the same. Like, everyone really cares about making sure that these are a safe environments and we're doing what's the right thing to do. All of you, most of you have venues that you're working with, and which brings expense to it, but they also have degrees of you have programs and festivals that occur outside of it. Nick, I'll bring this back around to you. I know that the City of North Liberty does a lot of programming and festivals, and what's been the experience there with some of the things that you've been planning for the summer?
So obviously our biggest thing was, so on Monday we announced that we weren't going to hold our big summer festival, Blues and Barbecue, and a lot of that was driven by the fact that how do you plan for 17,000 people in a park 3 months from now, not knowing what that's going to look like? And so that was, so we made that decision. But obviously, we're still, as a city, doing a lot of arts and culture and outreach. Our library is doing a great job with a ton of online programming, as well as making sure that folks have access to books and movies digitally, as well as through some curbside drop off. You know, it was a vision that luckily, you know, Andre was there to help us sort of talk through the artist side of that. But there were just so many big pieces that we're going to have to address without really knowing what it was going to look like. That was the not holding the event was really the best call that we could come up with.
Hey, speaking of the artists, I mean, that's a big piece of the planning in all of your worlds, is how do you continue to engage with them, and what's happening behind the scenes as far as like musicians or others that are coming through this community and that are on tour? I mean, Andre, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think Chuck alluded to it, which is, you know, everyone's really feeling it. You've got the artist management and the agents. You've got us who are based here in the communities across the United States. And so it's a moment of uncertainty across the board, from the independent folks who are doing it to the big, you know, big box agencies and the big super popular artists. And so everyone's really just taking things day by day, you know, checking in a lot on email, on phone, on Zoom, whatever, just saying, hey, where are you guys at? Where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? And just kind of watching the landscape shift day by day. So if nothing else, I think it's brought a lot tighter communication between all those different parties as they understand what's important for an artist to survive, for a community to thrive, and for, you know, the folks in their administrative side to stay intact as well. So that's one positive in a really difficult.
Andre, that's so true. And, you know, our business, what we do is so risky anyway, even without the pandemic. I mean, you know, you talk about the risk associated with weather, with, you know, box office attendance, with artists, you know, getting ill, with audience members not being able to to hear or whatever. And so this just adds to the messiness and the risk that we have in our business day after day after day. And another thing too that I really feel for the artists is that artists, for the most part, there's exceptions, but they do it because of the love of what they do. And they're not real flush with resources. And so this is really a trying time for artists more than ever. It just makes me ill to think about the fact I know that they're not all going to make it. You know, they don't have huge bank accounts that can support them, but they do it for the love of what their area of arts is. And I just I fear for the future for so many of them. So it just adds to the risk element, you know, which is a part of our business day after day.
This is kind of a general question, but what does this mean for, I mean, a lot of these are acts that are coming in, artists that are coming in from the community, but some are here locally. Is there a difference in how you all have thought about working with artists locally, or will this be a shift? I mean, Evan, you already do that. You have a lot of local talent, and you work with groups that come in. How does it impact them?
Yeah, I mean, most of the groups that we're working with are not artists who are attempting to make a living on what they're doing, but they're amateur groups primarily, and so at least that has a different kind of cushion, but it does certainly affect the organizations that they work with, and the folks that they serve. You know, the vast majority of the people that cross our stage every year are school kids, and we are the home for a lot of school concerts here in the spring that are not going to happen. And so, you know, you wonder what the impact of that is on, you know, a generation of kids who start to go time without, you know, having the music experiences and the theater experiences that many of us were fortunate to have growing up, and what the future looks like for the kids in our community is always a challenge. And I think, you know, we are we are really well placed in Iowa City, in Coralville, in this area to bounce back in a meaningful way, because we have a community that is already supportive of the arts, that is behind the mission of these organizations here today, and many others not on this call. And so I feel very fortunate for all groups, large and small, here in the community. And I start to think about how we, as a real bright spot in Iowa, can help serve small arts organizations and small communities around the area and around the state to make sure that the arts bounce back in rural communities and small organizations as well.
Have you all found success in applying for the PPP or other programs that provide federal or state assistance? Have you seen that working?
I can take that one, Nancy. For us, we have applied for that program, and for those on the webinar that are not familiar, probably most of you are, but that's the Paycheck Protection Program through the Small Business Administration. And we have been successful in being approved. We're still waiting for that to be funded, but that's certainly a great resource, especially knowing that much of that could be forgivable for the 8 weeks following the loan origination. So especially for payroll expenses, that's going to be a huge help.
We've heard a little bit in the business community about the challenge of getting some of the, if you're approved for those loans, for that funding, you need to bring your staff back on the payroll, right? And has anyone run into difficulty getting their staff to come off unemployment or that furloughed status when it may have been a richer offering to come back on payroll? Has that been an issue for anyone?
I'll address that, Nancy. We haven't had that experience yet because our furloughs have really just started fairly recently. So I don't anticipate that being an issue. Just the nature of our team, I think they're going to be ready to get back to work. So I would not expect that, but it certainly could be the case.
Andrew, did you have something to add there?
I was going to say something similar. We've also been approved, but we have not yet gotten the funding, so it's coming soon. But you know, like Jeff said, I think our group loves what they do every day. So they're eager to come back to work and be in the business of welcoming our patrons back and showing movies and creating a fun and exciting experience for the people of Iowa City. So, I think the hard part for our crew is I think they're eager to get back to work, but we're not able to open our doors right away. So I think we're going to be spending a lot of time doing some planning and some deep thinking, as Evan alluded to earlier. This is an opportunity for us to examine everything that we do during kind of a slower time than we are normally afforded. So we have to take advantage of that luxury to make sure that we use this time wisely. And I think that's what's staring us in the face in the weeks ahead.
That's a really, it's an excellent observation that in general, our business community is going through some, very, very similar motions here. However, when it comes to the actual work of it, it is work. And the fact that the arts community has got staff and programming that's just based on passion, I assume that there's a benefit there in what it will do for everyone's organizations in the long run when it comes to these programs. Related to like how cities are working, Nick, can you share a little bit about what that looks like for the city or any of our cities, Iowa City or Coralville, that a lot of these programs are not applying to your workforce, right? So is there an impact that the public should worry about or know about or understand?
So for our staff, a lot of us are working from home or we've split up shifts. We obviously have essential services that we need to make sure that we're maintaining. And so we have plans in place to make sure that we can continue to maintain those. And I think, we're also recognizing that we need to be there to serve our communities. And I think Iowa City, Coralville, and North Liberty are all working hard to make sure that they have staff that are in a place to be there to continue to help our wider community through it.
In the arts and cultural realm, is that role still, I presume there's still a priority there for our communities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I say, I think our libraries have really stepped up and are leading as far as the government angle goes. We're doing up in North Liberty, we're doing curbside resource checkout. We're making sure that our Wi-Fi is accessible from our parking lots. We're making sure that folks can get books and movies online. We're going to start rolling out a program for folks that don't have computers at home, so they can check out a no contact computer to make sure they can, if they need to access unemployment forms and that kind of thing that's online, as well as other resources. So I think though we're doing what we can to make sure that folks can continue to access the parts of culture that really are beyond just food and shelter, because the arts are an important piece, and that's an easy thing I think to forget as we see so much need in our community. But the arts really are a really important part of what makes life worth living.
Well, I presume, this is the choir here, but I 100% agree. It's really part of our larger ecosystem to make sure that our community, really survives and thrives at the end of all of this, and to keep the arts and cultural elements, first and foremost, and understand what the impacts are and how they also need that support. I mean, already operating on thin margins, if any margins. So it's clearly an important time for that message. I want to switch the
Nancy?
topic here. Oh yeah, Chuck.
I just mentioned something. You talked about resources, and I've just been thinking a lot too about, Hampshire, of course, is part of the University of Iowa, and so I've been thinking about the resources within the university, like the College of Public Health. At some point, I want to reach out to them to be able to really talk through, and they have so many renowned professors there that might be able to help us in terms of procedures, policies when we finally do open up again. I don't know any epidemiologists, but I would love to be able to connect with some of the professionals in that area. So I think even just locally, some of the people that we have access to, they could provide a lot of support and a lot of help. So that's something else besides the dollar, the resource. In terms of dollars, there are a lot of professionals here who I think can really help us come back and really study and figure this thing out. So we need to rely on some of them too.
Well, it's a good segue really to what does reopening look like. I know that we've all talked about uncertainty, but there will be a time, whether it's mid-May, 1st of June, I don't know when it is, but when the doors are open for people to come back and open up our stores and our venues, what do you at this time perceive that to look like in that really near-term picture? Can anyone jump in and speak to that? It's a tough one. Jeff,
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's for us, right? It's recognizing that 17,000 people is the wrong scale, and this is all about dials, and it's a dial and not a switch. So our hope is that we can still do something sort of under, for example, the Blues and Barbecue umbrella, but that we're going to be talking about smaller engagements, more intimate things that are okay, and we can manage a little bit better, rather than giant community festivals that attract thousands of people and have, sweaty kids running around and people jammed into food lines.
So Nancy, of course, we've all been thinking about this. Part of it is we don't know when. Nobody seems to know when at all. Hampshire belongs to a group. It's called Major University Presenters, and so there's presenters from all around the country, 19 of them, and we've been in existence. We've been a group since, I don't know, for about 25 years or more. And I have never found the group more useful than now. And the odd thing is nobody has any answers, but they're, all kind of people who really have access to others that, are professionals that would provide guidance if they knew it. But it's a quandary, and they're all kind of all over the map in terms of when the reopening will be. But one thing that the common theme when we had our Zoom call the other day was that it's going to be a new norm. It's going to be a new world for all of us. We're going to have to really put together processes and procedures from the front of house to the backstage area, that really make our audiences feel comfortable, our audiences feel safe, our artists to feel safe. And we all know too that audiences are ready to come back. People are tired of baking bread. They're tired of playing cribbage and watching, the movies on Netflix. There's pent up demand, but at the same time, I think people are going to be very cautious about coming back. And so I just look at the word trust, and I really want us to be able to create an environment that people can trust, because people are going to want to come back, but we've got a big job ahead of us. And I think about the financial implications, seating. Is it every other row? I don't know how people are going to feel in terms of the social distancing. Is everybody going to have to wear a mask when they come? Or we have to take everybody's temperature? There are just so many things that, and then I don't want to think about reopening and then have to close down again. That's all a real scare. So there's really lots of questions, but at this point, I think the answers are really hard to come up with.
Yeah, you're right about that. One of the I wanted to share the screen here, and Jeff, right today, you shared this with me, and I thought it would be helpful just to take a look at this survey. So hang on here for a second while I share the screen, and then Jeff, if you could walk us through this a little bit, we'll take a look. Does everyone see this coming up for everybody? It's a little blurry, but.
Thanks, Nancy. This is now a couple weeks old, but this is from Colleen Dillenschneider. Some of you might be familiar with, and she does a lot of work with arts and culture institutions. And a survey, again, probably 2 or 3 weeks old now, but of about 4,000 people, and asking about their opinions about what would feel safe and comfortable and what would help them feel safe and comfortable about going back to a museum, theater, aquarium, zoo, or concert again. And the way that this was done was in a very kind of qualitative way. So it was a conversation, and then they used software to kind of extract themes. And that's how you see the graph there in front of you, and how those percentages came about. So it wasn't like they asked, okay, Nick, would you come back to a cultural institution if there was a vaccine available? It was just from the conversations. And so some of these things are not really surprises. As I kind of looked at this through our lens of the Children's Museum, you see hand sanitizer coming in at 43%. They're probably not a big surprise if you had more sanitizer stations, for example. But one thing, and this kind of speaks to Chuck's point a little bit, one thing, if you look at number 6 there, which is not a small percentage, 32.5% of the people who responded said something about the organization showing that they were ready, that they felt confident, that they were a safe place, and that they had taken appropriate steps. And we don't know, as Chuck said, we don't know what all those answers are right now. But the fact is, I think that speaks to a lot of things that we've talked about the importance of us staying in relationship with our constituents, can build greater trust with them in what we're offering to them, and the communication that's coming from us as arts and culture institutions. So something that I thought was pretty interesting there. Obviously, near the top of the list, you see lifting of sanctions and social distancing measures, or easing of those. Not a big surprise there. Seen others visit, 60%, so people do look at their peers. And I think we've seen a lot of that on social media, where people are like, oh, so-and-so is out, walking with 6 of their friends. Should they be doing that? And so there's that kind of peer pressure aspect of all of this too. And then the question of being outdoors too. So I thought that was interesting as we think about, Nick was talking about the potential for Blues and Barbecue with a different, a different level, a different scale. Will we feel better about doing a concert out on the Hampshire lawn, a small scale thing, in July, versus packing a bunch of people into an auditorium? So I think there's really some interesting takeaways there, and it just occurred to me to share that with everybody and maybe generate some more discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the things related to this that was kind of an eye-opening for me is just how we cash handle when people come in. This is true of a business or nonprofit or anyone, but how are we doing that? and can it be done online or without any kind of touch point? And I think that that technology is there. It's just a matter of like bringing it to bear to our local venues and to start, Chuck, you were saying like, your technology isn't necessarily something you've always jumped into. And actually, I presume arts and cultural folks, they love the live aspects of community gathering and the experience. And I think all of us are going to have to do a lot of learning in the technology realm to understand how we can be safer with some of those pieces so that we can enjoy community gatherings. And so we've talked a little bit about cash handling and what that looks like in the future and how we ensure that those long lines don't happen. Lines are challenging, but I think that we've already seen some changes to them just in how our essential stores are operating and what they're doing with the platform as you come in and having 6 feet between and marking that, and how long lines can get when you're standing 6 feet apart. So there's some kind of new realities here, and maybe there's some innovations around them as we think about what does it mean to gather as a community in a safe setting. Any other thoughts here? We have some questions, so I want to save a little bit of time for that.
You know what I think we need to do too, Nancy? Of course, it's hard to know. We don't even know when we're going to reopen, but we need to all together figure out a way to do a celebration together of some kind when when the time is right. We all at this point are trying to keep our distance and trying to stay out of our spaces, but maybe a progressive sort of event, where we find a way to celebrate each one of our places reopening. And I don't know what that even is, but it's so future oriented and so positive oriented. And I think that's one thing we're missing right now is we got to grasp for some light at the end, something shining. And we're just such a great community anyway, and some great way to be able to bring everybody together with something so positive, I think would be awesome. So I don't know. We'll put that on your shoulders, Nancy.
No problem.
I would add to that just I really like the notion of looking for rays of sunshine in this cloudy moment. And for Film Scene, we've been planning for more than a year our inaugural Refocus Film Festival, which is to happen September 18th through 20th, and we didn't think we would be announcing it in the middle of a pandemic, and so that was a challenge, and we debated whether or not to do that, but learning that we were going to share that weekend with the rescheduled Mission Creek Festival, we then started to look at it through that lens of, well, hopefully this is something to look forward to. This is something that if the pieces, fall where we hope they will, we'll be able to gather together as a community and celebrate the arts. So we are trying to look forward with hope. And in the meantime, I'm just incredibly encouraged by the support from our community. We've received so many donations from local community members. We've actually already exceeded our budget for Film Scene as a member-supported organization. We've already gotten more members this month than we had budgeted because people are being so supportive. We've been doing virtual concessions pickups on Friday nights so people can take home some popcorn and watch movies with Film Scene popcorn at home. And those have sold out the last 2 Fridays. We're doing it again. And we're also trying to use that as a learning experience, as was mentioned. There's no cash handling involved. Everybody prepays and tells us what they want when we walk out to the car. So maybe there's some lessons there that we can also learn. But I think looking for all those opportunities to find the hope in this situation, and certainly a lot of that comes from the incredible community that we have.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think the relationships built before this are certainly being strengthened now, and we're lucky at the scale of our community that we have such good relationships amongst all of us to sort this out now. I mean, I'm sure in the larger scale communities, they're meeting people for the first time, and we already have a sense of that this is a trusted community, and it's a community of integrity, and it's going to do the right thing, and we're going to work together to get through it. So I want to make sure that we have some time for some questions here. So I'm going to there's probably 3 or 4 here that we'll go over. there's a lot of, in our community, there's a lot of people that work in weddings. And I think that they're looking maybe towards this group a little bit about how to know and how to base their decisions on moving forward with those kinds of things. So, and the information comes a little bit slower from the state and federal government. So those, I'll just ask the question specifically. We have many weddings wanting to know what dates or group counts they can base their decisions to move their date on. So I think a lot of them have positioned around some of your events. What kind of feedback would you give those planners?
Well, I'll take a stab at this, which I think is that I'm probably fair in saying that none of us on this Zoom call want to be the people to make that decision. And that none of us are attempting to be public health experts. And our goal is to be cautiously optimistic and then to turn those kinds of decisions over to the people who really are experts in our community, regionally and nationally. And so certainly for us here at the CCPA, you know, we're taking our calls on the Department of Public Health and through Johnson County and the state. And so I think it's important for us in the arts and culture community to be responsive to those folks rather than trying to make, you know, patchwork decisions organization by organization.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that one?
You know, I mean, I think that the biggest thing is that we can't, you know, one of the assumptions that we made making our decision is that we can't make assumptions, right? So how do you, we won't know what the state of affairs will be in a month or 2 months or 3 months. And I think it's folly to try to guess what that is. So I wouldn't plan anything for a month out that I couldn't execute today, is sort of how I, you know, will approach it as things sort of start to open back up. And I think if I was getting married this summer, I would wait until I knew I could get my guest list of 200 people together before I proceeded.
Just to add to that, I think what I would do is I would, you know, pick your date, go ahead and plan, but I would have a contingency plan in place. Because that happened back in 2008 too. And I remember one bride and groom that actually had thought ahead and they did have a contingency plan in place, and that's what they ended up doing. I don't know what it was, but they were really accepting of the cancellation. And they said, well, we've got other plans that we had made just in case things didn't happen. So I think if you can, I think backup plan is for a big wedding, because that takes so much planning, so much detail. But I would say a contingency plan would be probably a wise thing to have.
You know, one thing that I can share is that knowing all of you folks and others that are planning for events, including city government, we're doing our very best to stay in touch with those organizations and understand what they're planning for in the fall. And right now, I would say there are a number of organizations that are trying to postpone for late summer and the fall, recognizing that that is soft right at this point. Like, you have to kind of keep planning, because if we're not planning, what are you? I mean, we're not going to sink. We're going to continue on, and you know, one foot in front of the next. You know, push for the fall, and then we wait and see what happens, and then you push it out later, and take that public health advice and really follow it, because that's all we can do right now. So to Andrew's point about, you know, going ahead and pushing out for the Refocus Film Festival, it's going to be an amazing festival, and paired with Mission Creek could be awesome. There's lots of things happening that weekend in general, and I think there's an opportunity if something were to happen with that, you know, you just look to plan C. So I think that's kind of the state of affairs right now as I see it from our organization, because we're going through some of the same conversations and developing a strategy that's, you know, lots of options, you know, worst case scenario to best. And it's a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of emotions embedded all in that strategy, but it's what we can do to keep moving forward. And I know that our community is really behind us and cares about these events and all of these organizations, and wants to make sure that the arts and culture community not only survives but thrives when we're past this whole thing. Chuck, I have a question specifically for you about the Big Splash. Can you share anything about your planning there? I know we've gone over it, but there is a question here asking.
Well, listening to Nick, I wanted to jump in and make him feel a little bit better. We just decided yesterday that we are going to postpone the Big Splash, which just breaks my heart. It's been 4 years, I think, in the planning, and we couldn't have a contingency plan for this because it is a big splash. And so details will be forthcoming. I really, we're working on what the postponement means. It's not going to be in the fall. It will be a while from now. So we're in the process of, the donors have been connected with. We got to connect with all the artists, and so it was a tough one, but it was the right thing to do. I really feel it really, really was. There's so much that goes into it that we just couldn't have what's out there right now, the uncertainty facing us. So, and right now is when a lot of the work was really going to start. The planning's been, in place, but the work was really to come. And so we did right. I've gotten good response so far from everybody, but it's not easy, is it? Andre and Nick and Andrew, it's tough. It's no fun. It really isn't. But you have to. And when you hear the news, when you see things happening, there's a lot of worse things happening in the world, and that kind of is something too that makes me feel better anyway. So gives us something more to look forward to.
Thank you, Chuck. I know these decisions are hard.
Yeah.
I have one final question, I think, for the group. We have a wonderful arts and cultural community already. Has anything come to mind about what things that we potentially would help us recover beyond just funding? I mean, I know funding is always helpful, but are there some systems that we could change, or are there any innovations that you're seeing that might be helpful to advance this community in the future related to the arts? Does anyone have any thoughts around that?
Sure, I can think about that. As you said, of course, funding is really important. That's important for everyone right now, right? Just sustaining and pushing forward. But when we think about membership programs or friend programs or donors, whatever it is, it's not always like, hey, can you give this amount of money? But can you find a way to stay connected? And maybe right now someone's squeezed and they can't give a few dollars, but they can share a program that's happening on their social media. They can, send an email to their friends or to their family network. I think it's just keeping this arts and culture network that we have in the area top of mind, along with everything else. And I think Nick kind of expressed this. There are some true needs in terms of shelter and food that are real and we need to address. And it's also remembering this heart, this spirit that drives the community that happens through the arts, to make sure that stays in all of the conversations as well. Because that, some of it we'll be able to provide now through some really adaptive programming and bringing awesome things to people while we're sheltered in place. And some of it, will come with these beautiful celebrations that happen 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whenever they happen. Those will need to happen there as well in order to keep us excited and keep us, I think, pushing forward. So I think keeping arts and culture in the conversation in whichever way you can.
Andre, totally agree. And I think you addressed this a little bit earlier, Nancy, but recognizing that the institutions that all of us represent, and there are many others out there as well, obviously, that we are an essential part of the fabric of our community. And it's easy to get discouraged and understand that obviously there are much more urgent needs than any of us are necessarily meeting. But if any one of our organizations ceased to exist on the other side of this, it would have an impact on our community and a detrimental impact. So I think that's really been on my mind of late is, how do we continue, as Andre much more eloquently said, talk about ourselves as an essential part of this and get people to act accordingly, not just now. Some great success stories coming out, but how can we be successful long-term? And that's it's about messaging, but it's about bringing people together to understand too that we talk about what a special community we have. Organizations like ours are a big part of that.
Related to that, the one thing that we've talked about a little bit is, at least today, we have some opportunities through technology to connect, and just to be mindful that there are people who do not have this technology to connect and that are not receiving any of this programming, while many people are staying connected through it in their personal homes. I can share from the school district, there are kids out there that don't have the technology to stay on top of even the small amount of homeschooling that may or may not be occurring. So it is there are some real disparities in what will happen with aid, and I don't even begin to know how we address that, but I know that we have opportunities in this community to really look at it. And I know that we've got some thoughtful leadership in our municipal and county levels that are looking at that and that care. And the arts can be an expression of some of that, of those challenges. So I appreciate everyone on this panel. I think one last question, Andre, for you, just if you have any information about the Englert's renovation, if that's still on track. And then I'd like everybody just to share what the public can do for you to support you before we log off here.
I hesitate to say anything about construction because you say a date and then it's a date,
Oh, yeah.
as everyone can agree with on this conversation. But we are actually planning to push forward with the long-planned renovations at the Englert. Hopefully later this spring. We're just trying to execute some semi-final or final paperwork in the next week here, and there will be some work being done, and working with the contractors and all the subcontractors from the area. They're still figuring out how they can work in these new conditions, and we want everyone to be 110% safe while doing this work. So we are pushing forward, hopefully in the next 4 weeks, but it could get pushed down, but there will be some activity happening. And I was actually talking to Andrew about this earlier. We will be capturing some of that on video and sharing it with the community. So even if people are at home or somewhere tucked away, they can see some of the progress happening from a distance.
That's great. Anybody else want to jump on and share what their how to support your organizations?
Well, Nancy, I just want to I'm looking at your theme, we are in this together. And I think that is, I go back again to the flood, and that was such a different situation. Whenever I talked about the flood, I'd have to explain to people kind of what we're going through, what it was. And now you don't even have to do any of that, so we're all one. And so I think the success of how we got through the flood is the collaborations, the partnerships, the empathy that people had for us. And now we need to remember to have that for each other, because we are all in this together. So I commend you on that theme. It's really, it's great. I think it sums it up really quite nicely. We don't know what the answer is, but we're in it together.
Right.
On that note, I was just going to say, these moments of crisis, I think, bring out the best in us at times, at least in this community. And we've, in the downtown area, the arts organizations, the nonprofit arts organizations that exist right in this physical kind of, circle have banded together to form the Iowa City Downtown Arts Alliance to keep those conversations going. We're part of a bigger ecosystem, but just because of our proximity, we've started having more frequent conversations and talking about some of these issues and hoping that we come out of this and stronger than we went into it. So I do think that resiliency is a theme that we've seen played out in this community many times, and I hope that continues.
Andrew, I want to add one thing to that. That was great. I wanted to remember, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is that downtown Iowa City is it's so great. It's so unique. It's so different, but we're not all, there's the restaurants, there's the stores, in any way that, because we're not the only ones shut down. Everybody's shut down. Any way that we can really kind of help that, bring back that culture is way beyond all of us too. I think we need to think about that in our planning also, because they're a part of this, and that's really what makes Iowa City. It adds to all the work that we do, So I think that's something that in our planning, they're in this together with us also, you know. So I wanted to mention that earlier. I wish I would have.
Well, it's well stated. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and sharing some of your thought processes during this time. I want to remind those who are viewing to, if you have any questions or if you're looking for some support or resources, please check out icareatogether.com. That's the website that our partners have built to help communicate at this time and put all the resources in one spot. We'll have a weekly Wednesday webinar coming up. Next Wednesday's State of the Community will be Kate Moreland will host it, and it will bring together the leadership around education in our school systems to talk about next steps there and what they're thinking. And in general, please thank a healthcare worker. They're on the front lines. They're doing great work in this community, and I think we all hope and pray that this COVID pandemic goes as smoothly as possible and then passes, so that we can all get back to what we love to do. So if there aren't any other parting words, I thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks.
So take care.